Alright, this is going to be an overview of a tool I made in Reaper called the Gun Automator. And the purpose of the Gun Automator is to speed up the workflow and iteration time of designing automatic weapons. And I imagine it has other applications as well. For this video specifically, I'm just going to talk about the functionality of the tool, and probably at a later date I'll do more of a real-world application with some sound design. So you can see that there are a couple different sections to this tool, including the fire rate at the top. And if you're working in games, generally you'll have you'll set a static fire rate that doesn't change. So usually this is a thing that you'll set, but you won't adjust. Now that's not true in all mediums. This can also be used as a very experimental tool, as you can get wildly different sounds just from adjusting it to different speeds. So we have a fire rate of 0.1 seconds and a start time at 10. What the start time does is it just locks in everything to start at the same position. You can move this around as well. A lot of the processing and adjustments come from these tracks parameters. So the way this works is you select a track and adjust a parameter. So I can adjust the item pitch here. And as I do so, the pitch will increase or decrease. On the topic of pitch, you can either do a regular pitching or a pitch stretch, which will maintain the item's position, but it will stretch the pitch, or it'll stretch the waveform. You see these parameters, they have R's next to them. And what these do is when you hit this refresh random, it randomizes anything with an R. So for example, with pitch, we have a random pitch max and a random pitch minimum. And on the selected track, once hitting refresh random, it's going to set each item to have its own randomized pitch value. We can do the same thing with the item order. We can randomize that. So if I turn this on this track, and I'm going to multicolor these items so you can see, and then hit refresh random, and now it randomizes the order of the items. Keep in mind that I'm just working on one track, but you can select multiple tracks and adjust values as well. So I could set the random order to on for both of these, and now it randomizes both of them. Or I could hit this parent track and turn it on, and it'll set values to every child of the parent track. Another thing we have is to be able to adjust the item positioning. So I could select this track down here, and I could adjust the item positioning offset, or I could have a little bit of add some randomization to the positioning as well, as you can see. I also have for the last item where I can set a position offset for that as well, which can be useful in certain cases where you want the tail of your weapon to behave a little bit differently. Okay, I have a few things related to changing the item lengths. So first of all, I have just a regular item length offset where you can go shorter or longer. I have, crucially, a last item length, so specifically for the last item, so you can let those tails ring out. And then I have this parameter here, which is called trim left edge. And basically what this does is, if this is set to true, it's going to trim the left edge of these items. But if it's set to false, what it's going to do is not allow it to trim past the snap offset. I'm going to demonstrate how this is useful for iterating as well as rendering out your items. So let me I'll try it with this. It's kind of a mech sound. I'll chop this up. That looks good. I'll refresh. Okay, and now you can see that with these mech sounds, well, and as well as these ones up here, but we're just going to focus on the mech sounds for now. The transient is a little bit offset, so what we can do is hit snap offset to peaks, and that'll set the snap offset to the peak of all these items. And then we can do use snap offset, which it's already on. I can turn it off, but when I turn it on, what it's going to do is now use the snap offset as the start position for the item. Now, if I come in here with this trim left edge parameter, you can see that as I move to the right, it's going to stop at all the snap offsets and not go past them. And this is pretty useful for when it comes time to rendering things out, because you don't want to have to go through and chop each of these individually. You can do it with this tool where it'll look at each snap offset and stop at that snap offset. So I can move it back and forward, and it's going to stop at the snap offsets. Now this isn't too bad for this particular situation, but we could have an example where maybe the snap offset on this first item was a little bit further forward relative to these other ones. So if I move this back now, you can see that as the second item's snap offset hits, the first one is still going. And that's really useful in this sort of situation, because now these are ready to render out without having to go and chop each of these items up. One last thing related to this is that you can set a little bit of a buffer time. And what that allows you to do is have a little bit of a space in front of the snap offset, just in case there might be a little bit important audio information that you don't want to lose. So as I adjust this now, in this case, we have a 0.005 second buffer time, which could potentially be useful. I set that back to 0, and I adjust this, and now it goes straight to the snap offset. So that's how that works. Okay, now for a lot of modern weapon sound design, there's this idea of indicating with sound to the player that your magazine is running out. So I'm going to duplicate this track. And with this second track here, actually I'll do it with both of them. For these two tracks, we're going to pretend that this is that sound. And for that we can hit mag end, turn it to on, and now you can see that these start from the end of the shot rather than the beginning. And so these can be used to test out that mechanism of these items starting towards the end of your clip. And to do that, we also have this mag end volume increased so that you can have the increase of sound going. And so this parameter is in decibels. So what this does is basically it subtracts from the first shot, it gets its level, and then subtracts -3 dB from each item in front of it. There are some standard fading parameters, fade in shape, and fade out shape. So I have this concept of adjust to largest, and what this is going to do is for any selected tracks that have fewer than the tracks with the max number of shots, it's going to take those items and duplicate them so that they're matching, in this case, tracks 4 and 5. As an example, I have these environment type sounds, but I only have 3 of them. And I need, in order to be able to hear my shot properly, my gun sound properly, I need to have these matching each of these shots until the end. So what I can do is select this track, hit adjust to largest, and what it's going to do, actually let me refresh that. Oops. Need to fix that. I'm going to multicolor these. And what this is going to do is basically duplicate these over and over again until it meets the number of the max shot tracks. In this case, it's tracks 4 and 5. I can set this off again to get rid of those when it comes time to render, so I don't have the duplicates. I think the last parameter on the tracks is to ignore processing. So you can select any of these tracks. I'll select these two. And now when I make adjustments, it's going to ignore these. So that can be good in situations where maybe you have some source files on tracks and you don't want them to be processed by the tool. Or maybe you want to just position these manually where it's not processed by the tool. So that covers everything tracks related, and I think I covered everything here except for the prep render. I'll talk about that in a bit, but the last section here has to do with items. And I'm going to do this just on this sub, even though these are all the same, this can demonstrate this. I'm going to multicolor these. And what this sequence number does is you can select an item and set a number on it. In this case, I've set this first item to be 1, which means that no matter what I do, if I randomize the order, oh, and I need to turn off ignore processing, that helps. If I randomize the order, you can see that this first shot is never changing. Or I can take this orange item and set it to -1. And this is now always going to be at the end. So obviously this can be useful for tails where you don't want to have them in any other position but at the end. So now as I randomize this, you can see the first item is at the beginning and the last item is at the end. And of course you can do other combinations. So if you wanted to create a special sequence of shots, you could have this be 2, this be 3, and so on. And you could get interesting orders. Now, there's another thing that you can do where if you have multiple variations, say you want to emphasize your first shot item, and you have multiple variations of that sound, you can select multiple items to be 1. So I have here, so these first 4 implode, and now these first 4 first item shots will always be at the beginning, and you'll only hear one of them. And you can do that with any position. So I set all these to say -2, implode. Now they'll always be right before the -1. Of course, I can set these to -1, implode, and those were added to the -1. And I can do refresh random, and it's going to randomize all those takes as well. I can hit explode, and they all go back to just regular items without takes, so that you can prepare for a render. That's about it for that. And on the topic of rendering, I have this prep render here. And basically what it does, it just gives a little bit of space to your items just to allow you to render, and it maintains all of the positioning and offsets and everything like that. You can also adjust the space by dragging, and it'll set more space if you need it. In this case, 1 second is good. So that's pretty much it for the tool. If you have any questions, let me know, and thanks for watching.